This came out, I believe, just last week. This is a hardcover book called X-Men: The Art and Making of the Animated Series by Eric and Julia Lewald, who were the showrunners and writers of that wonderful show that first appeared on Fox Kids way back in the day. And this is a really, really cool deep dive on what it was like to make that show. It is... it's interesting because I was expecting a lot of really wacky concept art, but for the most part, the early designs are pretty close to what the final show looked like. But seeing the storyboards and seeing the sort of the hand painted backgrounds up close is really exciting. But the most exciting thing for me is a lot of the weird making of details that are in the actual text. And I figured sort of, while talking about this, we could run down some of those. The book is out now. It is 288 pages with 300 illustrations. It's $50 US or $63 Canadian. Again, it came out on the 13th of this month. We actually have an interview with the authors up on IGN.com. Jesse Shadeen did that. So if you want more info, go check that out. But I figured I could just kind of rapid fire, kind of run down some of the more interesting tidbits of trivia I kind of gleaned from this. Just even in the first half, I still haven't finished reading it.
Right. Yeah, I'm probably around the same part, and I will say, like, the writing is very fun and conversational, and I was like, I just had a big smile on my face, like laying in bed reading this big fun book.
One of the early pitches for an X-Men cartoon actually involved Charles Xavier, Professor X, and Cyclops driving around in a van with a dog looking for mutants, because that was in late 80s, early 90s, there hadn't been a serious superhero TV show. So there was like no precedent for like, what does a good X-Men show look like? If you look at kind of, there was Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. There was the Pride of the X-Men sort of pilot that got put together, which we'll talk about in a second. But as far as like what this show was, it was pretty unprecedented. And also like X-Men weren't a household name. Like that wasn't really a hit comic series for quite a while. Like if you look at kind of alongside, you know, Avengers and Fantastic Four and Incredible Hulk and all them, like X-Men was kind of a dark horse until the 70s.
I mean, you and I were texting about this, I think, right around the time we got to this part of the book, like describing the original pitch for the show as basically being Scooby-Doo, but looking for mutants. Had us both cracking up like crazy. Like that is immensely funny.
Like, yeah, this is fine. This is all good. So Stan Lee, the late, the great, the man himself, one of his ideas, he wanted to be involved with this. He wanted to be a big part of it. One of his ideas for the show was that he thought that at the top of every episode, he should be there sitting at his desk in live action, and he should be talking to the viewers, being like, "Greetings, true believers. Today, the X-Men are going up against the unstoppable juggernaut. What could happen next?" And the writers at that point, were very invested in telling like a serious, very dramatic show. We're like, oh, that might not work with what we're trying to do. Like we really we want like a more serious, mature story. Like, and having Stan Lee pop out to be like, "Hey everybody, it's me, Stan the Man, Excelsior," and such, you know.
Which, you know, Stan Lee also basically wanted to, instead of the iconic theme song that we know, like kind of over-explain the concept of what a mutant actually is, like right down to like a DNA level.
Yeah. So the funniest, like he definitely was like excited about not the wrong parts of it, because he, you know, co-created the X-Men, but the parts of it that the showrunners weren't really trying to show off. The weirdest thing about this though is despite them being like, we're trying to make a mature cartoon here, having the creator come out at the beginning, sitting at his desk and telling the viewer what they're about to see. We don't want that. And then a few years later, when HBO did its like incredibly M-rated, adults-only Spawn cartoon, Todd McFarlane did exactly that. He'd be like sitting in a warehouse and he'd turn around and be like, "Have you ever wondered what it'd be like if you were a Navy SEAL and you died and you went to hell? Well, this is Spawn. Welcome." And it was like, it's kind of an odd juxtaposition there. Anyway, shifting gears here. This is just a wonder. There's the Beast there, who originally started out as kind of a side character. They didn't really want to show him off too much. That's why kind of early in the first season, he's kind of in jail the whole time. But they wound up just loving writing for him so much. And I learned that of all of the sort of cast who were attached to the original animated series, the only one who showed up in the X-Men movie was the truck driver who drops off Rogue at the place where she sees Wolverine having that cage fight. That's the voice actor for Beast. And it's just like a wonderful, just nice little...
Oh, that rules.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, and anecdotally, the woman who voiced Jubilee also played Claire Redfield in Resident Evil, I think. But yeah, moving on, the sort of infamously, there was the Pride of the X-Men, which was sort of a failed pilot for what could have been an X-Men cartoon. This came out in the mid late 80s, and it was made with the budget for an episode of the RoboCop cartoon show. And I love that we're at this point where like they were like, yeah, I mean, the superhero comics might be too violent. Anyway, let's make a cartoon based on RoboCop. But yeah, basically they kind of funneled some of the budget of that into making this one-off episode that was going to showcase a bunch of the X-Men and try to really, play to their strengths. But unfortunately, a lot of the executives were making the decision there, and sort of famously, Wolverine, who is, if you're unfamiliar, just one of the most legendary Canadians ever, has an Australian accent, inexplicably. And I always wondered about that. I wonder if that was somebody who didn't know what they were talking about. Turns out they definitely didn't know what they were talking about, but also they were trying to capitalize on the popularity of Crocodile Dundee, which was really big.
That's so unbelievably interesting that they went down that rabbit hole or crocodile hole.
It's a very weird one. I kind of want to go back and rewatch that with just knowing that it was kind of designed by committee for that. This one is super interesting. The X-Men animated series, or the X-Men 92 aesthetic as it's known, is very clearly heavily inspired by Jim Lee's designs, because he came out and did X-Men #1, which was one of the best-selling comics ever, period. I think maybe the best-selling single issue. And he gave like the X-Men this wonderful kind of redesigns. A lot of what we associate with their character designs comes from Jim Lee. And the big thing he did in the early 90s, kind of alongside the X-Men animated series being spun off, is that he went and co-founded Image Comics with Rob Liefeld and Todd McFarlane and all of those guys. And he was that was a big political weird thing for Marvel Comics. And so at one point they basically, while the show was still in development, and it was a very rushed development to get this first season out the door, they came in and they were like, no, we don't want to show any Jim Lee designs. We don't want to give that guy any more credit. Like he's a traitor. He's gone off to make, Wildcats or whatever. And at this point, the writers were like, the showrunners were like, we've already made these designs. We've already started making this season. Like, you can't just pull the rug out from under us. So one of the artists basically was like, all right, here's some alternate designs, and gave them the worst possible designs, which unfortunately are not in the book, but I think just made like really just intentionally. And I don't even know what that looks like, because character designs in the early 90s were pretty bonkers. So like, what does that look like? And apparently Marvel was like, ooh, all right, never mind. Do the Jim Lee thing. It's all good. So yeah, those are just a few of the tidbits of details that we learned from this wonderful book, which I'm pretty stoked on. Yeah.